Welcome, everyone. You are listening to the Votes and Seats podcast of the Center for Political Science at MCC. My name is Szabolcs Janik, Senior Researcher of the Center. In today's episode, we will discuss the political background and results of the early Croatian legislative election held a month ago in April. And I have the honor to welcome Professor Višeslav Raos from the University of Zagreb, with whom we will discuss the mentioned election. Thank you very much, Professor, for accepting our invitation.
Thank you for your invitation.
Let's start with the fact that the overwhelming majority of the MPs voted for the dissolution of the Sabor in mid-March. What happened? Whose interest was this move? And what was the broader political background of these developments?
All right. So first, constitutionally, it works like that the Sabor, the parliament, has the dissolution. But then the president of the republic has to pick a date for the election itself, okay, which has to be 30 to 60 days from this day of dissolution. Okay. So you could argue that it's actually the government that decides when to dissolve the parliament because the government has the majority in the parliament. Okay. Everyone knew in Croatia already that this will be a super electoral year because also this the European election that we all have in June, but also Croatia has to have a presidential election, which will be around Christmas. Okay. And it's also a direct election. It's not in the parliament like in Hungary. It's also a direct election in 2 rounds. Okay, like they have in Slovakia and in Czech Republic and Slovenia, etc. Okay, so we knew it's a super electoral year, and next year, so next May, we also have a local election. So this campaigning will go on also next year. So there is a practical reason, there's a political reason. The practical reason is that the Electoral Commission also thought that it would be beneficial that we don't have overlapping of 2 campaigns and 2 candidate periods for the parliamentary election and for the European election, especially because, according to Croatian law, there's this thing called electoral silence. That 48 hours before the election, you cannot do campaigning, you cannot have electoral polls published in the media, etc. Okay, and then the political reason is that the Plenković government was thinking, how do we benefit from this timing? Is it better for them to go to the European elections? Because we know from different countries in the European Union, citizens may use European elections to sort of punish the government. Okay? Often in European elections, people will maybe vote more to the left or more to the right, but definitely, the governments are usually not so popular at European elections. But then at the same time, this particular government, the center-right government in Croatia, is it's run by an EPP party, and for them European elections are very important. Plenković used to be a member of the European Parliament, and we can talk later about European election, but we can already now say that the Croatian Democratic Union will surely have the most seats in the European elections in Croatia. Okay, so a situation where they don't win the election is very, very unlikely. Of course, it won't be an absolute majority, so it's 12 seats from Croatia. So will they win 6 seats? Okay, this will be a big win for them if they win 6. But they'll surely win 4 or 5, it depends. Okay. And now the opposition, especially the center-left opposition, Social Democrats, but also the Green Left, they were pushing for this early election because there were a lot of corruption scandals and because they were very, very disappointed that the governing majority in the parliament chose a judge for a new public prosecutor called Ivan Turudić, because they claimed that this person had contacts with many people who actually were also persecuted for corruption in the past, and that he's very close to the party, to the Croatian Democratic Union, and that's why they said he's a very bad choice. And after the parliament actually voted him in, so the Croatian Democratic Union and their smaller partners, including I think minorities, that the majority voted him in, there was actually a protest. There was a protest by the center left, and they demanded elections. Okay, the protest was not so massive, but they said they didn't want it to be massive. They wanted to send a message. Okay, and then afterwards, what happened is that very soon after that, actually, the government majority did dissolve the parliament. It's also in politics, it's a bit of a power play. Okay, so you don't want to show that you caved in to something that the opposition wanted you to do, but you wait for a week, for two, and then you do the same thing. But then you can say, okay, it was our decision. So for the government, it was very important to show who's calling the shots. Who's doing this timing. It was the same thing for the last 4 years. It could happen that there was a scandal with a minister in the government, and eventually this minister left the government. Yeah. Prime Minister told him, well, I'm sorry, but we cannot work together. But they always waited. They didn't want to show that it was the media that pushed this person away from the government or the opposition. It's always a power play. Because otherwise, it would seem that the government is weak and that, it's the journalists that actually appoint or dismiss ministers. Yeah. So, and last point to this first question, a lot of people outside of Croatia, they say it's an early election. But technically, because it's in the same year that it was supposed to be, I would say, yeah, it's a bit early, but it's not, it's not that the government fell and then we had a new election, middle of the term. So, in that sense, yeah, it could have been in June. It could have been in September. There were some people thinking that, okay, maybe we could do it on the same day as the European election. They do that in Belgium. They'll have the national election now and the European election. And of course, if we did that, that would be great because we have a good turnout for the European election, obviously on the same date. And then, you could say, wow, people showed up for the European election. But again, logistically, from the perspective of the of the Electoral Commission of Croatia, it was a problem, because in Croatia you have these 10 electoral districts, and then for the European election you have one district for the whole country, and on both lists you can also have preferences. So it would be a bit complicated to run these two elections on the same day. It's not impossible, of course, but people at the commission, at the Electoral Commission, they were very happy and that it did not turn out like that. That it was not on the same day.
And what was the political stake of this election in general? You mentioned some points also in this regard, but if you could name the key points, what was the stake for the governing powers? What was the stake for the opposition powers, and of course for the country, for the Croatian community, society itself?
Okay, so the government wants to project stability and security, which is sort of normal if you're already in government for 8 years. It's quite normal for a more conservative government. Okay, they emphasized, joining the Eurozone, joining Schengen, new fighter jets, which were bought from France, which came a bit later after the election, actually, but still they were around. And the opposition emphasized corruption. Okay, this was their main point. It was about corruption. And they said, okay, there has to be a broad anti-corruption coalition. And that's why, there was this joint list, a coalition list of Social Democrats and Liberals. But, they were actually talking about building this huge coalition also with the Green Left. And if not possible, then maybe with some conservative forces as well. Although during the election campaign, they did not talk about, working with the other side. After the election, when they saw that the result was not so good for them, then the center left, the Social Democratic leader, Peja Grbin, he also approached the conservative parties, which were not in government, and then, tried to build this huge coalition, everyone against HDZ. And they often mentioned, the Social Democrats in the campaign, they mentioned that it worked in Poland. That in Poland, there was a government change where there was this broad coalition of both the left and the Christian Democrats and liberals, and they all united against PiS. But they did not mention Hungary, because in Hungary there was a similar thing, but it failed. So it's a bit funny, You could also argue in Slovenia there were times where everyone was against Janez Janša. So sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work. I think the problem with the opposition in Croatia was that they said just corruption. Okay, they could not really reach some of the voters with other topics. Although they did open some other things, and I think it was interesting. Maybe this is your next question. Which topics were actually important in the election? And I think the topics that were mentioned will still be prominent for the next government, although some of the topics were sort of raised by the left. But still, now we see that everyone is talking about that. One of the points is, for example, in Croatia, a lot of people who have extra money, they invest in housing, okay, in extra flats. And this raises, prices, especially in bigger cities. And it's also because of tourism. And in the last 2-3 years, almost a third of houses and apartments sold in Croatia was sold to other EU citizens, okay? So not Croatians. So a lot of other people from the EU will invest in Croatia, and they have their extra money, and they'll invest in property, because especially some older people also maybe think property is more stable than investing in the stock market. Okay, but there are concerns on the European level that some people from outside of Croatia, so other EU member states, that people launder money actually, and then they buy property in Croatia. Because when you buy property in Croatia, still the banks, the tax authority, they are not very thorough in looking where you have your money from. You come with coffers of cash, and basically it works. So people see this as a problem. The other problem is demographics. That Croatia has a very aging society, and now everyone is talking about that. It's not a conservative issue, it's not a leftist issue. Everyone is talking about that. People are talking about how do you raise specific cash transfers for having children, for large families. How do you help people build houses? Buy apartments. How do you bring people back? That was a huge topic that a lot of Croatians left to Austria, to Hungary, to Ireland, to Germany. How do you bring these people back? Okay. Some people, like the Homeland Movement, which now joined the government, they have these more elaborate ideas where they want to bring Croats back from South America. Okay, this is something which is sort of a bit long term, and it's not everyone thinks that it's very viable, that you can really do it. But when we talk about Croats who are in other EU member states, that sounds like a plan, trying to bring these people back. Security, migration, it was raised by parties on the right. It was not really a top issue. Before the election in the parliament, we saw discussions. And when Croatia was joining the Schengen, then people started discussing things and saying, okay, are the borders, strong enough? Are these people staying in Croatia or not? Mostly they're not. Mostly they're going to Germany. But then, because there was the adoption of this new migration pact on EU level, does that mean that a lot of people who get declined asylum status, that they will come back to Croatia? Because the current government actually started building some new, asylum centers in some rural areas where this would be a center where people will stay and then wait until their status is cleared, and that, as could take 6 months and whatever. So this is sort of this issue. Some people also raise the issue of foreign workers, because now maybe for the first time in Croatia you have a lot of foreign workers that are not from neighboring countries. They're not from Bosnia, from Kosovo, but they're from Nepal, Philippines, etc. Mostly work in tourism, delivery services, building. Okay. But if you compare that with the huge influx of foreign workers in Germany, it was because an aging society, but also because German economy grew so much, even in the 60s, and then it attracted workers from all over Europe. Here you have basically this idea that young people from Croatia left to Ireland, and then other young people from Nepal came to work in their stead. And often they'll do jobs that domestic workers, they don't want to do these jobs anymore, because the salary is actually low. So a Croat will not work for 700 euros. A very physically hard job. But then someone from Nepal maybe can support his family with this money. So it's, you see these differences. And I think the property tax, Croatian Democratic Union, in their program, they were against the property tax. But I think now, because this issue has been raised, they'll slowly, you also saw it after the election, they slowly started realizing they'll have to do something, no? Because a lot of people also say that there's too much taxing on same like in Hungary. Croatia has one of the highest rates of VAT, so it's 25%. That is a bit problematic also for a country that relies a lot on tourism, and VAT affects everyone. Even the poorest person you meet on the street, you give this person €1, and this guy goes into the bakery and buys bread and buys something, also pays VAT, by that €1. So no one can escape it, basically. So in Croatia, people claim that it's in property. Most of the wealth is in property, and not actually in salaries. And that salaries should actually be less taxed, and also goods. So VAT is a problem. Of course, VAT for any country, it's very difficult to lower it once you raised it, because it's the easiest revenue, because it's on everything. It's the easiest revenue. It's the one thing that every government knows. Okay, we can fill the budget, and then we can plan things with VAT. With other things, it's not so sure. VAT is yeah, of course they said they will lower it at some point, but I'm not really sure. It will probably stay the same, probably not go further from 25%. It has been 25% for more than 10 years now. It used to be 22 originally. When it was introduced in the 90s, it was 22. It was already very high at that point, because most countries had lower. But it's now we're stuck with this 25%, and that's just it. The war in Ukraine was not really an issue. Before the election, there were these clashes between the president and the prime minister, and because the president was a bit skeptical, do we really need to get involved so much? And he can veto some things. If there's no two-thirds majority, he can veto things. Not directly veto, but he can decline to sign. So he could prevent, for example, because there was no two-thirds majority for that, he could prevent this idea that Ukrainian soldiers would come to Croatia to train. Okay, so they said, okay, Croatia is already doing a lot, because Croatia is actually, it's a small country, but Croatia is sending a lot of military aid, not just humanitarian aid, it's military aid as well. It's not, marketed a lot, because, you don't have to say, we sent so many and so many rifles, just say, okay, we sent some military aid, and they definitely did. There are not that many Ukrainians in Croatia. I think at the peak it was 35,000, maybe. Ukrainians in Croatia, they're not really visible. You could walk around the whole day and not see any Ukrainian person, but you'll see a foreign worker from Nepal. So the only foreigners, who was really out there, will be foreign workers, and the refugees from Ukraine. It could be okay, of course. A lot of them are better integrated, they start to learn language, etc. But it's not really an issue. Croatia is very supportive on one hand, but it's not symbolically so supportive like in some Western European countries. You go around the city and it's all in Ukrainian flags. You won't see that in Croatia. Very few places where you see, oh, there's a Ukrainian flag. But then, if you look, at what the government is actually doing, it is actually sending, a lot of military aid, humanitarian aid, a lot of things are actually working. So I think it's a very smart approach, because it's sort of a bit low key, but still they're actually doing a lot. But I don't see that changing. I think it will sort of remain at that level. When the war started, a lot of people were actually saying that it's good that these refugees will come to Croatia, because it will also maybe help, demographically. But ultimately, as we know, most Ukrainians went to Poland, Germany. So Croatia wasn't really one of those countries that had so many Ukrainian refugees. Also, inflation is a thing that is a problem in Croatia. Definitely, raising prices. And, it's in Croatia, it's especially problematic because, the prices went up so quickly because this was the perfect storm. So Croatia joined the Eurozone. Everyone knew, that it would raise the prices, of course. Everyone who even supported the Euro knew, yeah, okay, it will raise the prices. The question is how much. But then, we know because of COVID, because of Ukraine, because of, sanctions on Russia, all these things have affected the European economy. Of course, that drove also the prices. And then especially, Croatia, because it's so reliant on tourism and services. If you take the whole package, that also meant then, of course, the prices had to go up. The government has actually done quite a lot, and it's very interesting that, it's a conservative government, but it did a lot of, let's say, economically left policies in trying to curb, the inflation. Of course, during the campaign, the Social Democrats said no, but we would do more, and they were talking about that, but not so much. It wasn't the most important issue. And if you actually look at data in Croatia, it started to slow down. I think we are past the peak of inflation. It's still bad, of course. It's still affecting a lot of people. I was recently in Austria, for a research study visit for a month. And I noticed in Vienna, that some things are actually cheaper. Food is cheaper than in Croatia, and I was really surprised. Again, maybe some of this food was imported from Spain. It wasn't Austrian food, and I was comparing to the prices of Croatian food in Croatia, but still, it was cheaper, especially when you compare, the salaries in Croatia and in Austria, which is still, the difference is still huge. It will also be interesting to see now when the European elections come. Will the European elections in Croatia really be about Europe? Or, as it's often the case in many countries, that it will again be about these domestic topics. We'll see that. We see now that some of them who have started already a bit, of campaigning, they'll sort of try to repeat all those talking points of their respective European parties. So the Green Left will talk about these issues that the Greens are talking, and then the Social Democrats will talk about things that the Social Democrats are talking. So maybe you can see Europeanization, that thing that it's sort of a copying process. Okay. Well, winners and losers. Definitely, who is a loser of this election is the leader of the Social Democrats, the Peđa Grbin, because he did have this coalition list of Social Democrats, liberals, and smaller parties, and he said, yes, we can bring down Plenković. And there was this whole thing that, President Milanović, who used to be a Social Democrat, announced that he would be a candidate, although he could not be directly. And because of also what the Constitutional Court said, they both are sort of losers. Although Croatian voters tend to forget things. Once we get into winter, it could be possible that Milanović runs again and wins again. Why would he win again? Because people will maybe not want to have one party control both parliament and the government, of course, and the presidency, so they might support him. So everyone on the left might support him, he might mobilize again. But this whole thing about the parliamentary election failed, It's failed because he sort of was this shadow candidate. They had this broad coalition and they won actually just one seat more than 4 years before. And 4 years before, there was another president of the Social Democrats who was not that popular, who did not have broad appeal, but he was not helped by the president, and he actually won, just almost the same result. And then, after the election, that guy, Bernardich, he resigned because, he was very honest and he said, okay, I did not achieve what I wanted, and he resigned. But this guy, after the election, he then tried to negotiate with everyone. Especially, it was funny that the Social Democrats at one point wanted to negotiate with the Homeland Movement, and everyone was like, okay, this does not make sense. It does not make sense. It will not work out. And it did not work out, of course not. but he tried. And now we'll see what happens in the next months. We'll see, huge discussions within the Social Democratic Party. According to their party statute, within 6 months they have to call, intra-party elections, and all party members, so it's around 35,000 people, will have to elect a new president and then new presidency of the party, and a lot of candidates. There will be a lot of candidates. We still don't know who will be running, but probably younger people who are, established as mayors, who, have some local power base, and will say that, they can make some change. Because this guy, he was in parliament for a long time, but he doesn't really have a local power base, and he is a bit of a bureaucratic guy, although he's quite young. So the other winners, are, of course, Plenković, because as we know, he stayed in power, of course. And then Homeland Movement, some people will attack them. They are hardcore supporters because they said, "Oh, how could you enter this coalition?" But everyone wanted to get into government. I mean, and that's the whole point of elections. Well, why would you go into elections if you don't want to participate in government? And for them, of course, it's a win, because 4 years before that, Plenković could have done a coalition with them, but he prevented that by going, with the small partners and with the ethnic Serb party, etc. So the Green Left also, they doubled their number of seats, and the Green Left was very smart not to go together with the Social Democrats, but go alone. You could say that mathematically, because of the electoral system, it would have been smarter to go together, but politically, it was better for them to distance themselves from the Social Democrats, because what we know from voter study, Social Democrats have a very aging population that votes for them, and the Green Left, they attract more young people, and they are trying sort of to benefit from this generational shift. So for them, it was important to really show that they are different, and now they have 10 seats, and it's very good for them. But they'll stay in opposition, but it doesn't matter for them. For them, the next battle is, of course, next year, because there's local elections, and they want to keep Zagreb. They want to keep the capital city, and that will be the big thing for them. What happened after the election is a very strong blow for the Most party. This is so Christian Conservative Party, a bit to the right from HDZ. They had a husband and a wife, both college professors, that were very prominent in the party. Although officially she was not a member of the party and he was, but they were both in parliament. And what happened after the election is that they actually left the party. Why did they leave? Officially, it was because there was some quarrels within the party about who will be on the European list. Yeah, but the actual thing is that they were too independent, especially the wife, Maria Selak. She said, at some point during the campaign, she said that yes, she's pro-life, but she would never be for prohibition of abortion, and that did not sit well with some other members of the party that have a very strong agenda on this issue, and they want to introduce something like a prohibition. Although in Croatia, I'm not really sure that would attract the majority. If you had a referendum, I'm not really sure that people could really support that in a referendum. Plus, probably the Constitutional Court could prevent such a referendum. But okay. Anyhow, now that they're gone, they were like the intellectual stars of that party. Now this party is much, much weaker. Okay, it's two people. Okay, but still, I think we'll see that in the European election. Before that, everyone said, okay, they'll also get into European Parliament. Now I'm not really sure. Now probably they'll stay out. The Homeland Movement will probably get 1 seat. The Greens will also get 1 seat. Social Democrats maybe 3-4 seats, and then the question is, how much do the Conservatives get? The HDZ, do they get 4, 5, or how many? It's 12 altogether. With the Homeland Movement, there is also a question: if they get into your parliament, where do they sit? Everyone already says, okay, they sit with ID, identity and democracy, but we don't know, because there are no official contacts. What we do know that some of their members, like Steven Bartulica, he's actually a Croat, originally from the United States. He's very active with ECR, with PIS, with Legutko, and just now after the election, he attended this huge event, which was in Budapest, where a lot of these people from ECR came, and so I would argue that maybe they'll go there, and that would be good for Plenković, because now when he's in government with them, with his friends and partners in the EPP, it will sit well. It will be better if his coalition partner is not that far removed. It's just in ECR, not in ID. So that would also be good for him. Some people also started saying that, maybe he'll leave the government and that he'll become a member of the European Commission. Well, okay, he does have ambitions. Okay, people have ambitions, but I'm not really sure that in this particular, he was one of the names named by Politico, etc. But I'm not really sure that really we'll see a president of the European Commission from Croatia at this point. And to be just a member of the Commission, why would he do that? He'll now the government will, will appoint someone. Now the new government, when the new commission comes, each government will appoint someone. It is a bit interesting what I saw now with some campaigning for the European election, that the HDZ is trying to frame Social Democrats, because the Social Democratic members of parliament, they're quite popular and they're quite, they're doing a lot of things. But at the same time, now the Christian Democrats are trying to sort of accuse them and list some things that, in the last 5 years in the European Parliament, that they supported certain things that were really not good for Croatia. For example, there's this discussion coming from Germany that as the European Union is becoming so big, that in the future, the European Commission should work like that not every country has one commissioner. And of course, a small country like Croatia has to be against this proposal. It's logical. Any government from Croatia has to say, no, we don't accept that. Same thing about, this question, do we move from consensus voting to more, qualified voting? Okay, the huge discussion in the European Union. And of course, it's only logical that, the position of Croatia would be, no. We're not good. Okay. And now they're trying to accuse these social democratic MEPs that actually that because the larger socialist group supported that they also sort of supported that. We'll see how they counter that, and we'll see if there's an interesting, debate on this issue during the campaign. Because if there is, it could be interesting to finally see, people campaigning about European issues, because mostly it's not really about European issues. It's about, just, repeating things that you heard from your, colleagues from the same party in Brussels, or it's just national things that you pack as European things. Or you campaign by saying, okay, I will be your voice in Brussels and I'll basically bring money back. It's all about, funds. But we all know that the European Union is so much more about, it's not just about, cohesion funds. Of course, from the perspective of Central Eastern Europe, cohesion funds are still important, but there's so much more, to discuss. Like, how do we have a manageable commission, qualified voting, migration policy, economic policy, digital policy, a lot of things that are actually important, and that affect, the economies and societies of each member state.
Professor, that was very exhaustive explanation of the background of the election. Maybe one last question, which you already touched upon in your thoughts, was actually the agreement reached and announced yesterday between HDZ and the Homeland, and also there will be need to involve some national minority MPs in order to ensure the 76 seats in the Sabor. How stable can this coalition be in the future, and how compatible are the policy positions of these two forces. So what are the chances for this new government?
Okay, so first, when you compare how many seats each party has, so Plenković in his first government, 2016, had a similar situation with the Most Party, because roughly they had the same number of seats as Homeland Movement now. And then later on, he had smaller coalition partners, so it was almost a single party government. It was much easier for him. Now it will be more difficult. He'll have to coordinate, and as we saw in the agreement, they agreed on 3 ministers from the Homeland Movement, plus around 10 state secretaries, and plus probably some positions in these public companies, etc. So it will be a lot of things for them. Generally, for Plenković, it was important because he is more of a centrist, that he doesn't let them, for the Homeland Movement, which are sort of more ideological, like culture and education. And this is a big thing. And he maintained that, so he did not give in there. The question is now, there was this big ministry of economics. Now they'll divide it into economics and energy. And the energy part, I guess, will go to Homeland Movement. Now, always the question is, with the Homeland Movement, people accuse them that a lot of them are connected to the gas business, and then by that to Russians, because this is huge in investor in Croatia, Pavel Vojnovac. Now he has diversified his business. He is now into food production, green energy, so like solar, etc. But how he started was that he had a very, very good 10-year contract with Gazprom, and he was sort of a distributor for them in Balkans. But he's a pragmatic person. To say that he's pro-Russian doesn't make sense, because he's not really political. But he's very connected to the key people in the Homeland Movement. So a lot of people critical of them will say, it's actually sort of a businessman's party and it's a Russian party, etc. Croatia is not Serbia, and in Croatia it's very hard to find people who are politically aligned to Russia. You could say that there are people who are making business with Russia. Okay, that's a different story. That's a whole different story. People make money with Russians. Okay, fine, but to find really people who are on the Russian side in terms of Ukraine, in terms of NATO, now it's very hard to find these people. Partially it's because of history, because in Croatia, being pro-Russian is sort of linked to being pro-Serbian, pro-Belgrade, and then in Croatia it doesn't really sit well with people. The problem would be, okay, on the one hand, it will be more difficult for Plenković because now the coalition partner is bigger. Okay, but on the other hand, he can sort of weaken them, because we know in the Homeland Movement there are sort of two wings. The one that really wants to cooperate with the HDZ and wants to just be this more conservative, more nationalist version of HDZ, and the other one which is really more to the right and really doesn't like HDZ because they think HDZ is actually leftist. There's an ideological divide. Okay, and already now we heard that one of the MPs, also he also comes from academia, a history professor, that he also might not actually support the government. So he'll stay in his party, but he'll not support the government. And he actually wanted to be culture minister. So it was interesting. How stable will this be? Okay, what Plenković can sort of use against his new coalition partner is the fact that this party does not really have a lot of governing capacity. We're not really sure whether their ministers, their state secretaries will really know how to run things. And maybe, they'll have to rely on the support of lower officials in the ministries who are not, party people, but still, they might maybe be more aligned to HDZ. So, for them, long term, it will be easier. And of course, some people are saying that, and I'm also keen to on this argument, that Plenković agreed now because he wanted to have a government. Okay, but in 1 year's time, we have these local elections. After the local election, he might try to find new partners. So smaller liberal regionalist parties who couldn't support him now, and of course cannot support him before the local elections because they rely on these local support. But after the election, because we already saw that, in 2016, He was with Most, had huge problems with them. And then in 2017, he switched, He switched, he brought in a new, small, social liberal party, and that cracked this party, because this party for 30 years it was against HDZ, and then the voters, they actually really went crazy when they sort of crossed the floor to the conservatives. But yeah, he said, okay, come in, and he gave them the education ministry, a lot of interesting things, and it worked well for them for 2 years after that. So he might have such a plan. Of course, he won't say that now. He'll say, no, we have a new government, we'll try to govern together, blah blah. For him, it was also very important that, because he didn't give in, and because the Homeland Movement will not get the education ministry or the culture ministry, that also means that the government will not have problems with some, left-wing protesters, which otherwise might be mobilized by some of these cultural change issues that might be if the Homeland Movement really controls, the culture ministry. The Homeland Movement will still try to sort of fight against content they didn't like, they think is not national enough or is not Christian enough, and they'll try to sort of influence the public television. They'll try to do a lot of things, but a lot of these things they cannot really do, because it's not easy to change things that have been around for years. Plus, when we talk about ethnic minorities, first of all, ethnic minorities again will support, at least some of them will support the government. Yeah, we know officially that it was the Hungarian representative who already said yes, and probably a couple of them as well. Yeah? That's one part of the story. The other part of the story is that the other part of the story is that, for example, the Homeland Movement said during the campaign, they said, we don't want a situation like we have in Croatia, that there are 8 ethnic minority representatives that actually elected, by a handful of voters, and they get to sit in parliament and decide on everything. And they actually wanted something that we know that in Austria they have not proper MPs, but just, like consultants. Or what happens in Hungary. In Hungary, it's just the German community that sometimes wins one seat, and then the other communities actually win these consultancy seats, which are not proper members of parliament, And they have this idea in the Homeland Movement. They said, okay, we want something like that, because they're very, they don't like the fact that government majorities are made through these representatives, that you need the ethnic minority representatives to actually form a majority. Although you could say Janez Janša, the conservative ex-prime minister of Slovenia, in his last government, he also needed the support of these 2 MPs, one ethnic Hungarian and one ethnic Italian, and he built his government. So it's not just Croatia. But still, that is their main argument. But they cannot really change that. Why? Because all this is in a constitutional law on ethnic minorities. So, Plenković can tell them, okay, fine, yeah, we'll do it. And then, he'll say, I'm sorry, but there's no 2/3 majority for that, So, yeah. So it's one of those things that in every campaign, people will just, announce a lot of big things, but actually they cannot deliver. And of course, some voters will be very disappointed. We'll also see, if the local election is then used by some people to punish them. We'll also see with the European election where, already the Homeland Movement will be punished, because some of the more hardcore supporters will say that they are sellouts now. But it's very funny, because, of course they wanted to get into government, and, it took a bit longer, but still, if you compare Croatia to, I don't know, Belgium, Netherlands, what it takes, it takes half a year to build a government. It took maybe a month, not even a month in Croatia, so it did not really take a long time. And honestly, even before the election, this outcome was quite likely. It was a likely outcome, And everyone knew that Plenković actually did not want this outcome. His preferred outcome would be that he still had a majority just with the ethnic minorities and these small liberal parties, that did not need the Homeland Movement, because now, it will be more difficult for him to govern. But still, even if he doesn't switch after the local elections, he might manage to do this for 4 years.
Thank you very much, Professor, for sharing your thoughts. We heard a very detailed analysis of the recent Croatian election. It was very impressive. Thank you for that. And thank you everyone for following our Votes and Seats podcast episode. Please stay tuned. Goodbye, everyone.
Thank you.